What if I told you that these uniforms belonged to a Marine officer who led a team of Marine combat correspondents and photographers in the Pacific and directed one of the most important documentaries shot during World War II, To the Shores of Iwo Jima? And what's his connection to Yellowstone's most iconic actor? This is Vestiges of History, where objects tell of storied lives, and this is the story of Matthew Milton Sperling. First, let's start with the vestiges. The first is the officer's summer service blouse, crafted from tan worsted wool and tailored at Kassenstein of Washington, D.C., with a tag that reads Captain M.M. Sperling, his service number, and the date of the order, 11 March of 1944, marking his return from the Pacific Theater. The 1st Marine Amphibious Corps insignia is still stitched onto the left shoulder. Imagine Sperling wearing this, sitting in a restaurant, having coffee, or walking the streets of New York and D.C. in 1944, fresh from the combat zone of the Pacific. Next is his blue officer's tunic, made from thick navy blue gabardine wool, featuring a pair of sterling silver Marine Corps collar devices, the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, and captain's bars on the epaulets. Both uniforms are missing their awards and decorations. But this tunic has a Hollywood twist, something I've never seen before. It was custom made at the tailor shop at Western Costume in Hollywood, and it's marked with Sperling's name and what's likely the number for the purchase order. Imagine Sperling probably walked right into Western Costume, which still exists today, and had this made just for himself, entrusting his blues, a kind of sacred garment in the Marine Corps, to a Hollywood costumer over the more affluent tailors in downtown like at Oviatt's. Now, Sperling was industry, a well-known writer and producer, and by this time, son-in-law of Harry Warner, the guy with the brothers who created that studio. It doesn't get more LA than this. Since his ribbon rack is missing and no awards are listed in his service record, I can only guess what decorations he would have earned. The American Area for Stateside Duty, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign with at least one campaign star, and the World War II Victory Medals. So, who was this guy? Matthew Milton Sperling was born in New York City on 6 July of 1912. Before going to Hollywood, he worked as a messenger boy for Paramount Studios on Long Island. Little did he know that would be the first step toward a remarkable journey that would land him on both Hollywood sets and toting a camera on islands in the Pacific. Sperling's Hollywood journey began in 1931 as a secretary to Darrell F. Zanuck and Hal Wallace, both legends in the early days of the studio system. By the late 1930s, Sperling was a member of the Warner Brothers family by employment and by marriage. He would parlay his writing experience into producing films. In 1940, he produced Sun Valley Serenade, a musical comedy starring John Payne, Sonia Henney, Glenn Miller, and his orchestra, followed in 1941 by the first ever film noir, I Wake Up Screaming, starring Betty Grable, Victor Mature, Carol Landis, and the totally scene-stealing Laird Cregar. This film is a landmark in American cinema. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. Altogether, 1941 was a benchmark year for Sperling, as he also produced the Marine Corps propaganda film To the Shores of Tripoli, starring John Payne, Maureen O'Hara, and Randolph Scott. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything, though, including that film's ending, and suddenly the Marine Corps needed journalists and photographers to join its brand new public relations division under the command of General Robert L. Denig. For the first time, the Corps would step out from behind the Navy's shadow and represent itself to the public. This is huge. This marked the beginning of the combat correspondent, combat photographer, and combat artist programs in the Marine Corps today. Picture Sperling on some embattled beachhead as a Marine officer in combat and chronicler of history. Weapon in one hand, camera in the other. He stood side by side with Marine raiders during the Bougainville landing, capturing their grit through a camera lens while bullets whizzed past. I've been researching Sperling's wartime story for a decade. The trail went cold for a while, but I finally struck gold, a treasure trove of material on Sperling and the exploits of the men under his command. While much of what I found isn't in the public domain, so I can't show it here, I can describe it. Names, assignments, and even some incredible stories. Sperling joined the men of Company X, as they were called, in their billet at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard, just before the Marine Corps birthday on 10 November 1942. His company comprised seasoned journalists, photographers, writers, and well-known radio announcers. All were handpicked for their experience and skills at spinning yarns and capturing images and sound to tell the Marine Corps story. Sperling was 30 years old, leaving behind his wife, Betty, daughter of Harry Warner, and an infant daughter in their home in Bel Air. An interesting fact is that these weren't the first Marine CCs or combat correspondents to be going overseas. There were men already over there, like Thayer Soule, who joined in 1941 and didn't have to go through any kind of boot camp or indoctrination, and were thrown into intelligence sections where the officers didn't know that the Corps even had combat correspondents. The Corps learned lessons from that, and the men of Company X, all in their 30s and 40s, went through the gates of Parris Island. They were Marines. Around Christmas time, the company got their orders, and they boarded a train for Camp Elliott in San Diego, California. From there, they boarded the SS Lurline. They sailed east, headed for what they hoped would be an island amid pitched combat, typewriter keys clacking away, and 30 cal brass falling to the ground. The disappointment they felt when it wasn't any of that was palpable. They were destined for Noumea, New Caledonia, the Paris of the Pacific. But see, it wasn't even really Noumea. It was Camp Gotki, a city of canvas tents and Quonset huts far outside the city. They were not received warmly by the command there and were given odd details, like Sperling was made the base censor in charge of reading the mail, Meringue was in charge of base athletics and physical training, and Elmer Wexler, an acclaimed cartoonist, was detailed to sketch the colonel's pet dog. A turning point came on 11 February 1943, when members of Sperling's company were assigned to a raider outfit going into enemy territory. This was their big break. They were embedded as intelligence personnel, not combat correspondents. Jim Lucas of the Tulsa Tribune and Joseph Meringue of the Chicago Tribune, along with two photographers, filed stories that changed the trajectory of Sperling's company. That action they documented was the raid on Povuvu with the 3rd Raider Battalion. These boys hadn't seen anything besides jungles and rations for over 18 months, and were quite excited to meet anyone from back home. After that, the team entered a feverish period, dispersing across the South Pacific. Like bees returning to the hive, they returned periodically to Camp Gotki, their base of operations for the time, to file stories, rest, and then head right back out to collect stories, shoot film, and write copy. Sperling spent at least 4 months personally attached to the 3rd Marine Division between April and July of 1943. By the early fall of 43, Sperling's company was tasked with producing technical training films for the Marines, covering subjects like enemy weapons, booby traps, and camouflage. Sperling got a front row seat to the invasion of Bougainville, while attached to the Raiders in November of 1943. These photos are shot by a photographer who was with Sperling that day and are from Sperling's scrapbooks. These are the broadest of brushstrokes of what I've uncovered on Sperling, the men in his unit, and their year documenting combat in the Pacific. There is simply too much for a single video on this platform. In early January of 1944, what was left of the company began rotating back to the United States. The men arrived back at Headquarters Marine Corps, where they were either assigned to teach at the new correspondent or cine schools, assigned to a war bond tour, or in some cases be reassigned to the OSS. Sperling found himself in New York, where he produced the 1944 short documentary Battle for the Marianas. In late spring of 1945, the Corps sent him back home to L.A. to direct and edit a new secret project of fresh, uncensored footage with black sand in the Technicolor film canisters. This project would become the Academy Award-winning documentary of 1945, To the Shores of Iwo Jima. This film crystallized the American public's view on the war in the Pacific and illustrated the brutality of what our boys had to endure an ocean away. After separating from the service in October of 1945, Sperling wasted no time returning to Hollywood. He founded United States Pictures, making such films as the 1946 spy film Cloak and Dagger, starring Gary Cooper and Lily Palmer, the first film to tell the story of OSS agents operating in Europe during the war. In 1955, he wrote and produced The Court-Martial of Billy Mitchell, earning an Oscar nomination for his writing. Sperling's career was prolific, making such films as Retreat, Hell in 1952. His final United States picture production was The Battle of the Bulge, filmed in Spain in 1965. He even dabbled in spaghetti westerns, producing Captain Apache in 1971. In the late 70s and early 80s, he wrote and produced a glut of made-for-TV movies and television. Milton had over 40 credits to his name when he retired. He was also a founding member of the Writers Guild in 1933. It's important to note that Sperling stayed active in the Marine Corps Reserve until 1955, attaining the rank of Major. Milton Sperling passed away from cancer in 1988, leaving behind a remarkable story that spans from the Hollywood silver screen to the blood-soaked islands of the Pacific and back again. I didn't discover until 2022 that Milton Sperling was Cole Hauser's grandfather. Imagine my surprise. Whip Wheeler's grandfather's uniforms were right here in my house. But this story is about more than just a Hollywood connection. It's about the power of storytelling and the sacrifices made by those who came before us. That's why I do this. Now I need your help. Share this story, spread the word, and let's bring Milton Sperling's remarkable legacy to light. He passed away when Cole was just 12 years old, and I can't help but wonder if Cole knows the full depth of his grandfather's service. His commitment to veterans charities tells me that Milton's legacy lives on in his family today. Whether consciously or not, that spirit of service runs deep. This isn't just history, it's family, and I'd be truly honored to share everything I've uncovered with Cole and his family, especially his grandfather's wartime scrapbooks. That's what makes this work so fulfilling, ensuring that stories like Sperling's continue to inspire future generations. His uniforms and this extraordinary legacy deserve to be remembered and celebrated. They remind us that history just isn't about the past. It's about how these legacies live on in those who follow. And remember, this is only a glimpse of the story I've uncovered. So much more that didn't even make it into this video, so you can expect more. Now, thank you for taking the time to watch today. I appreciate every one of you. As always, you never know who will tell your story. Live a storied life.